Using my experience working in the archives of late media artists Joyce Wieland and Joe Spence, and participating in conversations between artists, archivists, and scholars of critical archival studies, this presentation considers the evolving workflows of the artist's archive after the digital turn, particularly in terms of the role of communities of labor and practice in the digital archives of media artists, and in examining how the care and oversight of human experts remains key to the well-being of collections and their histories, even in the big data context of the evolving episteme. The increasing ubiquity of digital archives, the ever-growing scale of digitization projects, and the shortage of space and funding for labor are contributing to the development and uptake of new mass digitization technologies. Such technologies, imbued with capitalistic, extractive aims and created for the management of big data, information assets too large and varied to be handled by conventional means, promise to parse and manage data in ways beyond the capacity of traditional methods. Such interventions, premised in automated and frequently artificial intelligence-based and algorithmic functions, and designed and implemented with somewhat utopian aims to take the place of paid human labor in the face of dwindling institutional budgets, promise to handle the large, often banal task of sorting through vast swaths of materials and data to extract materials of relative significance while relegating those deemed unnecessary to the dustbin. Oops. We are left to wonder about the fate, status, and characterization of the information that's most often discarded from collections under emerging neoliberal information regimes. Standards are meaningfully shaped by the knowledge workers responsible for realizing them. This becomes especially apparent when the labor of such workers is spread ever thinner or made entirely redundant, often without replacement or account. Intimate collection-specific knowledge communities, as with Wieland's and Spence's various collections, are an aspect of archival management that needs to be considered as technological interventions are being developed. What I might be considering here is the relation and intercultural entanglements between methods and approaches to big data and little data, theorized by Christine Borgman as smaller data bodies offering more precise insights and relating to a smaller, more community and project-specific scale. Both are embedded in the digital archive, and both are key to the health of the archival ecosystem. Importantly, archivists and other archive workers carry with them the narratives of the formation of artist collections. The processing of born digital collections, as it is currently described and undertaken, neglects, or so it seems, to account for the human fingerprints that imbue objects with stories and anecdotes. These all too human, messy, enriching narratives are often networked across collections and institutions, and these important but often invisible elements of media artists' archives need to be preserved alongside the more concrete parts of digital collections if we are to truly animate and preserve the depth of meaning attached to artists' archives. Under the digital archival turn, there remains a central custodial role for archivists and archives, and this role shapes collections and influences their function in scholarship and education. In fact, the kind of necessary thought as a kind of necessary thought experiment, as we observe the unfolding of new political regimes in real time, that archives themselves, broadly conceived as recognizable forms of collective knowledge repositories and information resources, might themselves be considered as non-human stewards of information in the MAGA age. When the human specialists who build them are eliminated from their positions, what does this mean for knowledge futures? It might go without saying that a key consideration in addressing changes in archival management is the tacit role of communities of labor and practice in digital archives of media artists. The care and oversight of human experts remains key to the well-being of collections and their histories, even in data-driven contexts. The fate of our future knowledge base rests on what kinds of knowledge we prioritize and save. In The Politics of Mass Digitization, Nana Bond-Thilstrup argues that mass digitization presents a new political cultural memory paradigm that ultimately introduces new forms of cultural memory politics. This puts into question the kinds of information prioritized, what needs to be managed, accessed, and preserved, and what can and will be forgotten or eliminated under this emerging digital archival regime alongside the developing episteme. We are left to wonder about the fate, status, and characterization of the data that is most often overlooked and discarded under these new regimes. Standards are meaningfully shaped by the knowledge workers responsible for realizing them. Intimate collection-specific knowledge communities are a cultural aspect of archival management that needs to be considered as technological interventions are developed. Those of us invested in sustained archival research recognize that archivists and other archive workers carry with them the narratives of the formation of collections. The processing of born digital collections, as it's currently described and undertaken, neglects to really consider these aspects of the archive. Changes in the digital archival regime import changes in the role of the institution and institutionality in art broadly. Major technological shifts have altered the ways we interpret and internalize both history and economies of scale. In Disordered Attention, Claire Bishop observes how attention is inherently mutable and has been reorganized in time with economic globalization and the internet. Bishop argues that pursuant to these changes, art making itself has manifested new strategies for creative engagement and expression in response to what she calls new technologies of information and image circulation that can be unconscious, oblique, internalized, or ambivalent, suggesting that, qua Thilstrup, the sense of an emergent paradigm related to the central concerns and capacities of digital technology are braiding future archival materials with the methods designed to preserve them. To further impress how deeply evolving archival technologies and future-oriented thinking are intertwined, note how conservator Joanna Phillips, a specialist in time-based media credited with establishing the first media conservation lab in a US institution, emphasizes the interconnection of art practice and emergent methods in preservation, pointing to the need for forms of anticipatory reasoning and a sensitivity for technomaterial exigencies, meaning the urgency of understanding the preservation needs of media art forms in digital collection environments. In the first chapter of Conservation of Time-Based Media Art, a 2022 book that she co-edited with Dina Engel, Phillips posits that when artists explore new technologies, materials, and media in their art making, and these artworks start to enter collections, the discipline of art conservation will eventually respond with the development of new methodologies, approaches, and practices to provide appropriate care for these artworks. As archival systems and methods are being parsed for their ideological implications and technological limitations, so change the methods for preservation and collection. All this to say, there are many moving parts to the issue of digital archival management in the present day. There is clearly a lot to unpack as we consider the potential impacts of AI-based automation in archives. For one, there is the consideration of what might happen when artists' archives are platformized and datafied. For this, I might point listeners to the work of Amelia Acker and other contributors in the excellent anthology, Uncertain Archives, Critical Keywords for Big Data. Today, I'm focused more on the questions of critical forethought and the roles of care and labor in archival environments in the digital age, but this is a really great text. My query about paradigm shifts and archival futures in the digital age has led me to consider my previous research in the notably analog archives of two deceased women artists whose archival legacies continue to be complicated and dynamic. Canadian multidisciplinary artist Joyce Wheeland and UK photographer, educator, and activist Jo Spence. I've spent extensive hours in and thinking about their collections, which are held in multiple institutions and have not yet been subject to digitization or other digital strategies, although with a major retrospective currently, some institutions have begun to digitize some of Wheeland's papers for internal use. Indeed, the only technologies that really mediate these archives are quite basic. They've been, at least in a public-facing way. They've been organized according to traditional finding aids, which can, for the most part, be accessed online on the websites of the institutions that own and house their collections. Furthermore, within the archives, I consider different institutional settings are represented, subject to very different mandates and protocols, making a comparative study challenging, but facilitating a broader reflection on these diverse traditional collecting contexts. Just some images. This is from the Wheeland Fonds at the Clara Thomas Archives and Special Collections at York. This is an image from the Jo Spence Fonds at the Image Center at Toronto Metropolitan University. And this is one of my favorite images from the Joe Spence Library at Birkbeck, University of London. It's worth noting that in many cases, to conduct my research, I've needed to be in regular dialogue with archivists to navigate the aforementioned finding aids to locate the collections and files that interest me. In my experience, uncovering detailed information has always necessitated human intervention. I can scarcely imagine how the implementation of AI or other digital platforms or tools, as they currently operate, could possibly replace the useful conversations I've had with archivists, including Jennifer Grant at the Clara Thomas Archives at York University, Charlene Heath at the Image Center of TMU, and most recently during a trip to the UK in April 2024, scholar cum community archivist Patrizia Di Bello at Birkbeck, University of London. Archivists have always humanized the institutional space of the archive, enabling a fulsome perspective of the organization of collections and funds, pointing me in useful directions when my research has felt overwhelming or confusing, and also sharing critical insider knowledge that can only be garnered from working closely with collection assets and the bureaucratic processes that determine acquisitions and other details central to the constitution of collections. Aspects of the archive that can often be underdocumented, that are rarely narrativized due to time, energy, and labor constraints. And while Grant, Heath, and DeBello each described the parsing of collections and subsequent elimination of unneeded ancillary materials with a sense of deep discomfort and even remorse, they were able to describe and recount the processes in great detail, an aspect of their experience that enhance the discourses surrounding the extant orderly collections. Grant and DeBello in particular each shared stories about how and why Whelan's and Spence's collections respectively take the form they now hold and can give logic and shape to the histories of the decisions that underlie their current holdings, giving a more fulsome sense of the objects in the fond or fonds. This compelling narrative attribute enhances and gives useful context to the lifetimes and careers the fonds have come to represent in the absence of the artists. That these experts in their respective domains continue to express uneasiness with the permanent removal of archival assets is an important reminder for how we might proceed in developing future collection methodologies. Not everything to do with archives is material or methodological. The kinds of knowledge represented in working archives are imbued with the humanity of those who work within them. Returning to my examples, Grant's and Heath's in-depth experiential knowledge stems from profound years-long expertise and training in working with these collections and the plethora of objects therein, while relatedly, DeBello's expertise comes from a decades-long friendship with Spence, whose informal, sprawling library and archive she oversees and stewards. Heath and DeBello, both experts on Spence and their collections, have an enduring working relationship that enables a kind of intimate but mostly unrecorded dialogue between Spence's international archives, so between Toronto and London. This is a common feature to our archival collections. Archive workers develop a kinship network premised in the inherent relational aspects of the objects and collections they oversee, not only because of professional commitments, but also due to the care work necessary in the stewardship of collections. Care is one of the requirements of the memory work at the heart of archival labor. Its intricacies have been actively explored in the scholarship of critical archival studies, stemming from renewed interest in the role of and operations of community archives by scholars such as Michelle Caswell, Marika Seafor, Tina Kampt, Jamie A. Lee, and others. Lee, a self-proclaimed unlikely archivist and scholar of the archive, has advocated for radical hospitality in the archives and community archives as a space of reception that itself turns into a sacred resting place that is defined by embodied stories and archival storytelling practices. These forms of embodied knowledge speak to the care commitments of the archivists and archival workers that activate the archive. Care is, of course, generally intangible and is therefore rarely accounted for nor remunerated in the more bureaucratic and materially documented processes of the archives, though again, the work of contemporary archivists and archive scholars is calling increased attention to its central role. Care is more so felt in the archive. It is invisible but present. Care is present in the details archivist experts carry with them in the intellectual space of their vocation, including in their knowledge of what has been excluded from collections and why. My experience of archives has led me to understand that archives will change dramatically without the contribution of the complex dimension of human care work and oversight, as impalpable and elusive as it might seem from a policy-making perspective. Or perhaps the vulnerabilities of the archive are becoming more tangible as archives of all kind become increasingly imperiled in an age of anti-intellectualism and the repression and denial of historical knowledge and diversified education. With my own experiential knowledge of the working conditions in Spence's and Wieland's archives, which read from my mostly outsider perspective, that of an archive user, not necessarily privy to the internal politics or economic institutional tensions of collection environments, as generally healthy, well-functioning, relatively stable institutional spaces, it also seems impossible that without a dramatic increase in labor power and the funding needed for said labor, the human insight and oversight needed to implement digital systems with the necessary care, attention, and general custodianship for the material relations of these important feminist collections would likely not be possible without fundamental systemic change. In light of questions of automated organization and oversight of collections, especially in terms of the management of digital assets in an uncertain episteme, I have great difficulty imagining how AI might handle the dynamism and nuance necessary to accurately process the assets being managed, particularly with enough detail to determine what assets are without a contextual value and can be discarded. Objects, assets in a personal archive, have relational and intercultural value, meaning that they contribute to a constellation of meaning. They are part of a broader assemblage that comes to stand in for an individual and their daily experience. Recalling Grant, Heath, and DeBellow's stories, I cannot help but think that there might be something useful and philosophically significant in painstakingly sifting through an artist's daily junk mail, punctuated by the more valuable revelatory digital correspondences that researchers traditionally traditionally seek. I don't know why I'm tripping over my tongue. For those who are less interested in archival research as a form of material intellectual meditation, there are other readily available extant ways of searching out specific kinds of documentation. But given the arguments for shifts in scale, method, temporality, and the paradigms that envelop them, and for those researchers or curious minds who wish to approach and maybe apprehend the quotidian rituals of the subject of study, are these material traces of the banality of contemporary existence, not a kind of container for the vacuous workaday experiences surrounding the events that serve as flashpoints in a life. Materials that are without immediate use or consequence can still be quantified and qualified as parts of a whole. And this kind of relational material informational equation represents a recognizably human story. And moreover, archival research has never been one size or culture fits all. Is care, here defined as expert consideration and attention to the significance of unique archival assets, compatible with the algorithmic systems of AI in the archive? Can human intelligence stand in the place of human labor, attention, and care? A question AI developers have been asking for over a century in the context of archives, and if so, how will that alter researchers' relationship with the archive? Thank you so much.